the significance of this report that's being released tomorrow?
It's huge because we only see one of these reports every 6 years, and it lays out a very authoritative and unarguable case that climate change is happening, humans are mostly responsible, it's going to accelerate, and there are things we can do to slow down this sort of climate change upon us.
And this report of the non-governmental panel, Heartland Institute?
It's what you'd expect from basically lobbyists who are working for the fossil fuel industry, whose profits are threatened by the scientific findings of the IPCC. You would expect a sort of blowback by the fossil fuel industry to dispute the science, to cast doubt, to play up some of the arguments against it, which really aren't under dispute by scientists.
And the conclusions are those not just of the scientists, but also, isn't there sovereign government involvement in the findings as well? Could you explain that for people who are not familiar with how the IPCC works?
Yeah, the IPCC is kind of a unique hybrid because it's not just a scientific organization. All of its results have to be approved by government representatives. So this week in Stockholm, the scientists have presented their information, and each government, 195 in total, have to go line by line through the report and approve it. So the politicians have a say in what is in the final report. As a result, the report is very conservative because everyone has to agree. It's unanimous approval required.
Jeff, what needs to be done?
We have to do two things. We have to cut down our emissions of heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide, and we have to adapt. We have to get prepared for the coming climate change storm, as I call it. It's already here. We're already seeing the impacts, and we better get ready.
And in terms of what's been leaked about it so far, some of the conclusions may be a little bit surprising. For instance, on the relationship between climate change and hurricanes and typhoons. What do they say there?
Yeah, they've reduced their amount of certainty that we've already seen changes in intense hurricanes due to human causes. So that reflects kind of the going scientific work that's been happening, which is not sure. There's a lot of variability in hurricanes naturally. Hard to tell if they're actually changing now due to a changing climate. So that's one positive maybe we can take out of the report. We're not sure we're actually seeing an impact on hurricanes and typhoons.
How does Colorado fit into this picture, the 1,000-year flood? And then in India in June, something like 5,700 people died in floods.
Yeah, one thing we are pretty sure of is that climate change is already causing an increase in extreme rainfall events, particularly in North America. And these are the type of events that we saw this year in Colorado and again in Asia. We've seen an increasing number of very heavy precipitation events, the kind that are most likely to cause some of the extreme floods we've seen in recent years.
Well, I wanted to bring Kumi back into the conversation. You're here for the United Nations General Assembly, and obviously President Obama spoke this week at the General Assembly. Your assessment of what he did or didn't say about climate change?
Well, he hardly mentioned climate change. And the thing about it is, you know, even the CIA and the Pentagon in 2003, in a report that was given to President Bush, which he chose to bury it, as somebody who was in effect an agent of the fossil fuel industry. That report suggests in the coming decades the biggest threat to peace, security and stability will not come from conventional threats from terrorism and so on, but will come from the impacts of climate change. So if any head of state, any political leader is concerned about peace, security and stability, then they should be using the platforms at the United Nations now to talk about the biggest urgency this planet has ever faced. We are talking here already of serious impacts, particularly in the developing world. We are seeing lives being lost. Darfur, I would argue, as the Secretary General of the United Nations argued, the genocide in Darfur was certainly intensified and exacerbated as a result of climate impacts. Lake Chad, one of the largest inland seas in the world that neighbors Darfur, has largely, to use the words of the Secretary General of the UN, has shrunk to the size of a pond, right? So, and then the Sahel Desert is marching from Senegal to Sudan southwards at the rate of 1 mile a year. So water scarcity, land scarcity, and together food scarcity was the trigger. So when you see all that happening, when heads of state are talking about all these sort of interventions around chemical weapons, all of which are important, but the biggest threat to peace and security is coming already from climate change, and it's going to intensify. So in that sense, I was deeply disappointed that President Obama didn't make that connection.
What could the U.S. be doing right now?
Well, the U.S. needs to recognize, firstly, that they are compromising their economic future, because the U.S. needs to forget about the arms race, space race, and so on. The only race that's going to matter in terms of which countries and companies will be competitive in the future is those countries and companies that get as far ahead of the green race as possible. The U.S. needs to take leadership. The world is hungry for U.S. leadership in climate negotiations.
It's interesting, President Obama in his speech was making the case for how the U.S. is exceptional.
Yes, and the thing about it is, you know, that case, the way it gets read, speaking beyond climate change now, is an approach by the U.S. of do as we tell you to do, don't do as we say. Do as we say, don't do as we do. Because the U.S., if you take on torture, they are signatories to the anti-torture conventions, but we've got waterboarding, we've got Guantanamo, we've got extraordinary rendition on respecting human rights and not violating people's privacy without their knowledge. And, you know, people around the world are saying things like, you know, we had so much of optimism when President Obama was saying, yes, we can, but with all this NSA spying, maybe you were saying, yes, we scan, yes, we scan, yes, we scan.
On the panel. But I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the IPCC report, what we know about it, because obviously it won't be released until tomorrow. What it says about drought and the future prospects for the planet, and specifically how it relates to some of the issues or the conflicts that we're seeing in the world even now, and also about the acidity in the oceans.
Yeah, drought is the #1 threat we face from climate change because it affects the two things we need to live, food and water. And the future projections of drought are rather frightening. I mean, we see large areas of the world, particularly the ones that are already dry, are expected to get drier, and that's going to greatly challenge our ability to grow food there and provide water for people. And I was a little disappointed in the leaked draft that I've seen of the IPCC report. It doesn't mention drought at all in the text. There is a mention of drought in a single table that they have there showing that, well, we're not really sure we've seen changes in drought due to human causes yet, but we do think, you know, the dry areas are going to get drier and this is going to be a problem in the future. So yeah, a huge issue, drought, really not addressed very well in the summary. I'm sure the main body of the report, which will be released Monday, will talk a lot about drought. And the second issue you raise, the acidity of the oceans, yeah, that we're sure that we've seen an influence. There's been a 26% increase in the acidity of the oceans since pre-industrial times. And the pH has dropped by 0.1 units. That's going to have severe impacts on marine communities, we think, and it's only going to accelerate. They're saying with pretty much 99% certainty the oceans are going to get more acidic, and it is due to human causes.
On drought, can you talk about Syria?
Yeah. In Syria, they're having their worst drought in over 70 years, and there have been climate model studies done showing that the drought in that region of the world in particular is very likely more probable due to human causes. If you run a climate model both with and without the human increase in greenhouse gases, you see a large perturbation in the drought conditions there in the Mediterranean region. So we're pretty sure that drought is a factor there. And in Syria in particular, I mean, people have migrated. Over 1 million people have had to leave their homes because of drought. They've moved into the cities. They don't have jobs there. It's caused more unrest and directly contributed to the unrest there.